This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work. I'm responding to another AskProfWolff question sent in from our Patreon community. This question comes from Ira Hurwitz of San Gabriel, California. And it is a wonderful question for a teacher, which I have been most of my life, because it engages the material that we've been talking about and poses important questions to it. Ira Hurwitz's question goes to my focus in my definitions of capitalism on the employer-employee relationship, the way I try very hard to show that slavery is a system based on master-slave, feudalism is a system that organizes production with the relationship of lord to serf, and that capitalism follows in those traditions by organizing production again with a minority of folks at the top who run everything and amass the wealth and power, and a majority of people who basically do what they are told. But it's not master-slave, and it's not lord-serf, it's employer and employee. And that's the focal point of the definition of capitalism. What Ira's question does is ask, basically, where in all of that is the capital, the capitalism that the name implies and that the name says. And he's right. In my eagerness to stress what's so often overlooked, that employer-employee relationship, I sometimes neglect to remind everyone that another part of capitalism, besides the employer-employee relationship, is the part designated by that word capital. What is capital? Marx's definition is as good as any. Self-expanding value. What does that mean? It means, in simple English, that you're engaged in something that takes a quantity of money and makes it larger, expands the quantity of money. Some activity that you can do with money where you start with 100 and you end with 110. That's money that has gotten larger, value that has self-expanded, etc. So where does that fit in? And as Ira rightly points to, the kind of perfect, simple example of what capital is would be lending money at interest. I give you $100 as a loan on condition that you pay me back, let's say at the end of the year, with an additional amount, the interest payment. So if it's a 5% interest, I give you $100 today on condition that 1 year from today, you give me back $105. You're paying me for the use of that money for a year. My money has thereby expanded. If I had just sat on the money or stuffed it in my mattress, it wouldn't be capital because it wouldn't have grown. To be capital, it has to grow. Well, there's a second example that's also simple, but yet not yet what we mean by modern capitalism. And why do I say not yet? Well, lending money at interest is thousands of years old. Capitalism as a system isn't. Capitalism as the modern system begins in the 17th century in England and spreads slowly across the world to the dominant global position it has now. But borrowing and lending at interest is much, much older than modern capitalism. And here's a second way that you can have your money expand without still being in capitalism. And this has to do with buying and selling. Sometimes when you buy and you sell, your goal is simply to take extra bushel of corn that you have and exchange them for an extra bushel of potatoes that the farmer next door has. In that situation, you're not expanding your value. You're just changing the form of whatever value is in a bushel of corn for whatever value, equivalent value, assumedly, is in the potatoes. You're not going to give more value of corn for less value of potatoes, so it's an equal exchange. The minute equal exchange arises, we don't have capital because you don't have growth. Well, besides lending at interest, what's another way? Well, again, Marx is our guide. Merchant capital, money that goes into a market, not in order to exchange one form of value for another, with an amount being the same, but the form, the particular commodity, being different. That's not why a merchant goes into the market. The merchant goes into the market with an amount of money. With the money, he or she buys goods and services in order to resell them. And to resell them, here comes, at a higher price. A merchant starts with 100, buys $100 worth of potato chip bags, and then sells them in his store for a total of $120. He's made his capital grow from the $100 he used to buy the potato chip bags to the $120 he gets when he sells the bags for more than he paid for them. That's a way of making your money grow. But we still don't call that capitalism, even though capital is involved. The word capitalism, and here comes the important point Ira's question raises. The word capitalism is reserved for a situation where you combine value creation, the growth of value, with industrial production, producing goods and services, which is not what the lender does and is not what the merchant does. The lender gives money, gets back more money, isn't producing anything. And the merchant buys stuff and resells it, isn't producing anything. But in a modern factory or workshop and so on, production is going on. Raw materials are being converted, say, for example, from wood and glue and paint into a finished chair. Workers are working. And here comes Marx. The employer buys the ability to work from the worker. And he puts the worker to work for one reason. That worker adds value. Staying with my chair example, the worker adds to the value of the wood, the glue, the paint, his own labor, which is why the chair is worth more than the wood, the glue, and the paint that are in it. The extra is what the labor adds. And now the punchline. Labor adds more value when it works than it is paid as the wage or salary for coming to work. And in that difference, the extra that the worker adds beyond what he gets paid, there is the profit, there is the growth of the value that the employer brings to the workplace. That's why it's capitalism. It's the coming together of production, labor, work on the one hand, and the process, the hope, the goal of raising the value of your wealth in the process. And that's why the employer snatches the product at the end of the day and sells it, because he keeps the difference between the value of what he sells and what he paid to the worker and to the provider of inputs that went into the production process. Workers produce more of value when they work than it costs the employer to bring them there. And that's capitalism, including the important capital growth, wealth growth part alongside the employer-employee relationship. I hope that was clear. Thank you, Ira, for your question. This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another AskProfWolff question from our Patreon audience.